Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here. This is Pastor's Point of View number 304. Today is June 7th, 2024. And I want to wish everyone a happy D-Day that happened. Very significant event in American history that happened just yesterday. We always want to be conscientious of the things that the Lord has done to help further Western civilization.
Amen.
Which makes broadcasts like this, possible.
Yes.
Had we not beaten back the communists and the Nazis and the fascists in World War II, we could be under Hitler's reign, as we speak, not having any freedom whatsoever. So we want to thank everyone and the sacrifices that they made in that regard.
Amen.
As I said before, today is June 7th, 2024. My name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. I'm back with my friend, colleague, fellow elder, associate pastor, Dr. Jim McGowan, and we have an aggressive prophecy update for folks today. There's our preview screen of the 7 things we're going to try to make it through, and if we can't make it through all of them in this particular session, we're just going to pick it up where we left off in session 2, which will be posted a week from now. Folks might detect, if you're a very attentive observer, sometimes there's going to be some differences in our set today, and that's because we share this stage with our VBS crew. VBS is going to take place this coming week, and so we would just appreciate people's prayers for all of the kids that are going to be here and ministered to for Vacation Bible School. A lot of people come to know Christ personally through Vacation Bible School, so we're
very true.
Trusting the Lord for many, many salvations.
Amen.
Well, let's start with our first bullet point, the world against Israel. And it's hard to keep up with the acceleration that's taken place in this area.
That's true.
Let's go back to a couple of prophecies that the prophet Zechariah was given 2,500 years ago about the world turning against Israel in the last days. Remind us what those prophecies say.
All right, we'll be reading from the New American Standard 95 Update. We're looking at Zechariah chapter 12. Let's say that correctly. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3. It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. And then later in chapter 14, verses 2 and 3, for I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle.
So just before Israel's conversion in the tribulation period, the whole world is going to turn against Israel. And I'm just shocked. I guess I shouldn't be shocked because God said it would happen, but it's just sort of shocking how quickly it's transpiring.
That's right.
Notice this first article here from the Middle East Monitor, May the 29th, 2024. It says Mexico requests to join ICJ genocide case against Israel. Now, this is a case that I believe South Africa filed against Israel in the International Criminal Court, accusing Israel of genocide. And ever since she filed that case, almost the major nations of the earth have been jumping on board, wanting to be a party to it against Israel. So
crazy.
What's going on here?
The International Court of Justice yesterday announced that it had received a request from Mexico to join the genocide case filed by South Africa against Israel due to the war on the Gaza Strip. This says several countries later submitted requests to join the case, including Turkey, Libya, Nicaragua, and Colombia. South Africa returned to the ICJ this month, calling for an urgent ruling to stop Israel's planned assault on Gaza's southernmost city, Rafah, with the court calling on Israel to immediately halt its Rafah offensive.
All right, now let's put up this map just to remind people what's happening here. There's a brown strip in the southwestern portion of that map called the Gaza Strip, which the Israelis gave to the Gazans in
Yes.
2004.
Yes.
And it's at that point, 2005, they had one and only one election. They used it to elect Hamas, and they turned the Gaza Strip into basically a terrorist camp with
Yeah.
tunnels and all kinds of opportunities to lobby, projectiles and all kinds of things from Gaza into Israel. So that's what caused the horrific events of October the 7th. And
That's
so
right.
what the Israelis have done is they've gone into Gaza, not to be against the Gazan people, but to root out Hamas from Gaza. So the events of October 7th wouldn't be replicated. And because they're doing that, they're being accused by the world community of some kind of, crime against humanity.
Yeah.
Some kind of global crime. And so that's what this charge of genocide, is about. It's not genocide. It's rooting out terrorism within your own borders.
And it's a false charge.
And it's a false charge. And South Africa files this case with the International Court of Justice, which is just the legal arm of the New World Order when you think about it.
Yeah.
The International Criminal Court. I mean, these are people that are all drinking, from the same empty cistern, in my opinion. And once they file this case, here comes everybody else jumping on board.
Yeah.
Turkey, Libya, Nicaragua, Colombia. And so you can use this as evidence that the world is turning against Israel, exactly like God said, at the end of the age. And of course, the latest pile or honor, so to speak, is Mexico. Now, it's interesting, Brother Jim, Mexico just had an election. They elected the first female, if I have this right, into the presidential position in Mexico, the leadership position. Her name is Claudia Sheinbaum, and I can guarantee you that things under her administration are not going to go any better, because she is just as left as her predecessor, and most likely just as anti-Semitic as her predecessor.
Yes,
and
sir.
so, things are continuing to deteriorate as the nations of the earth are turning against Israel in the last days, like Zechariah said, 500 years before the time of Christ, and we're just watching it happen. What would you add to that?
It just seems, you sort of expect European countries to jump on board. But when you start hearing about Africa, and now we're over on this continent,
Yes.
and they're pulling from this continent now, it's crazy.
Yes, it is crazy. And here's some more evidence of the world turning against Israel. You have now this article from the JNS. This stands for the Jewish, actually I got a little bit ahead of myself. This is an article from Breitbart. There we go.
Yeah.
And the title of it, May the 25th, 2024, it says, Israeli UN ambassador. If it, meaning the UN, doesn't reform, he says, the United States should consider defunding the UN. And so this is significant because he's just talking about how the United Nations can't be trusted really to do anything other than to issue ruling after ruling after ruling against the nation of Israel. And so what's going on here?
On Friday's broadcast of the Fox News channel's America Reports, Gilad Erdan, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, blasted the UN as an enemy of the values of America and the free world that is used to whitewash the crimes of dictators and rogues, and argued that unless there are fundamental reforms to the organization, the United States should give consideration to defunding the UN. After blasting the organization's mourning for Iran's Ibrahim Raisi, Erdogan stated, quote, I think that the most important thing is to understand that the UN has lost all of its credibility. It is no longer an organization that truly defends human rights. And I think that unless it goes through fundamental changes, the American administration should really maybe consider seriously defunding the UN. I'm not sure that your viewers are aware of the fact that they are paying $19 billion, almost $20 billion every year, and instead of strengthening your values, the values of America and the free world, you are weakening your values. Because today the UN is being used by dictators and rogue states to whitewash their crimes. Iran was also elected recently to chair the Human Rights Social Forum. You can't make these things up.
So this is Israeli Ambassador Erdogan rightfully critiquing the UN. Did you know they had a moment of silence for Ibrahim Raisi of Iran, who was killed in that helicopter accident? You know what his nickname is, Brother Jim? It's the Butcher of Tehran. And he didn't get that name accidentally. Okay.
Well, Pastor, they may have had a moment of silence, but there wasn't silence in Iran.
That's a great
There was
point.
rejoicing and praising going on.
Yeah, lighting off firecrackers and
Think about that.
and all kinds of things. So here's it would be like having a moment of silence for Adolf Hitler.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
what they did.
Exactly, yeah.
And then, according to Erdogan, Iran was elected to chair, not just a member, but to chair the Human Rights Social Forum.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, the greatest human rights violator on planet Earth is chairing the committee. And what's worse is who's paying for the UN. The United States
That's what's worse.
shovels out $20 billion with a
Yeah.
B dollars
Ridiculous.
per year to subsidize this anti-Semitic body. And so his complaint is just more evidence of the outworking of Zechariah's prophecies.
Amen,
that the nations
brother.
of the earth would turn against the nation of Israel in the last days. Now, he's
Amen.
pleading with the United States to get their act together on this. But the truth of the matter is the United States is not getting their act together on
No.
this. They're getting worse.
Yeah.
Notice this article here from, and this is where I was trying to go a little earlier, from JNS, and this stands for the Jewish News Syndicate. And here's the title of the article, May the 29th, 2024. It says, U.S. envoy accuses Israel of continued pattern of significant civilian harm. So it's almost like the United States is siding with Hamas and buying into all their statistics,
Unreal.
perpetually criticizing the nation of Israel as they're going into Gaza and as they're going into Rafah, trying to root out terrorism and Hamas, so the events of October 7th will not be replicated. But at any rate, what's going on here?
Robert Wood, Deputy U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, said at a UN Security Council briefing on the situation in the Middle East on Wednesday, quote, "We have urged Israel to do more to protect innocent Palestinian lives and to undertake a swift, transparent, and comprehensive investigation." Human rights attorney Arsen Ostrovsky, the CEO of International Legal Forum, and a senior fellow at the Mizgov Institute for National Security, quoting him, he said, "The fact of the matter is war is ugly and devastating, but not every error or unintentional loss in civilian life is necessarily a war crime." He goes on to say, "We must not forget that whereas Israel takes every precaution to avoid harm to civilians, Hamas has an utter disregard for human life, whether it be Palestinian or Israeli. The international community would be far better served to direct their outrage at Hamas, which continues to embed themselves in civilian areas and cynically use Palestinians in Rafah and across Gaza as human shields." Close quote.
There's no moral equivalence here
No, there
between
isn't.
how Hamas does its thing and how the Israelis do their thing.
No comparison.
The Israelis are fighting a war of self-defense. They do everything within their power to avoid civilian casualties, but that's kind of hard when Hamas hides behind, women and children
In hospitals.
And in hospitals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in any war, there's going to be collateral damage. That's just the reality of the situation. Israel, by dropping leaflets and all kinds of things, seeks to minimize that collateral damage. Hamas, by contrast, does nothing like that. and actually goes after the innocent.
Yeah.
And so what the United States government now is doing is saying, well, there's plenty of harm on both sides. The moral equivalence argument. And here's the United States envoy accusing Israel of a continued pattern of significant civilian harm, using Hamas statistics on this, which, as we've covered in prior shows, are largely fabricated and made up. There's been actual statisticians that say these figures that Hamas gives don't make any sense. But here's the United States, siding with Hamas in this regard by using this moral equivalence argument. And that's why what Erdogan said, that we should see the UN reform or pull out our $20 billion a year.
Yeah.
This is why we won't do anything about it, because we're not the pro-Israel nation that we once were. Am I overstating the case, Brother Jim?
Not at all, brother. I'm all for just moving the UN off site.
Yeah. Let's just move him to Babylon and let the Antichrist
might as well
get busy, with his one world
I'm
system.
with you, brother.
All right.
I vote
Now,
for
with all that being said, cheer up, folks. It gets worse. Notice this article from Breitbart, Joe Pollock. June 1st, 2024. This article says it's been confirmed. This is more evidence that even the U.S. is turning against Israel.
Like we didn't know
Biden lied about Israeli proposal.
Yeah.
To the point where right-wing ministers in the nation of Israel have now threatened to quit. And basically what's happened here is the Biden administration came up with a deal for a ceasefire that Hamas loves, by the way.
Yes.
And he basically lied about it.
Yes.
And basically he said, it was Israel's idea.
Right.
When it wasn't at all.
Right.
And he pushed this through right before Shabbat, if I've got that right,
Yep,
where
that's
Israelis don't have time to
during Shabbat,
or during Shabbat, Israelis don't have time to respond because of their holiday. And then you learn that Obama, here's the guy that won't go away.
Yeah.
Obama let it slip that the proposal was actually Biden's idea. What is Obama doing? I thought he was an ex-president. Why doesn't he leave and go somewhere? Well, the reason he hasn't gone anywhere is because we in the Biden administration are basically having Obama's what would this be, his fifth term, his third term, and he's reigning through the empty vessel. Basically the senile Joe Biden. And so,
kind of like a puppet master.
Yes. And so what Biden is doing here with this, coming up with a deal that favors Hamas, lying about it and saying it was really Israel's original idea, and then putting it forward during Shabbat where there's not enough time to respond.
Yep.
That's Obama's handiwork through the senile Joe Biden creating these things. And this is more evidence that the United States is turning against the nation of Israel, like Zechariah said all nations would do in the last days. But at any rate, help us with that article.
Reactions from parties in Israel's governing coalition confirmed Saturday that U.S. President Joe Biden lied to the world when he claimed a proposal for a ceasefire and hostage deal had come from the Israeli government. As Breitbart News reported, Biden presented a three-part proposal on Friday and claimed 4 times that it was Israel's proposal. Biden waited until the onset of the Jewish Shabbat to make his remarks, making it more difficult for the Israeli government to respond. Notably, the proposal did not call for the destruction or disarmament of Hamas, and Biden told Israelis in his speech that they could not expect total victory. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued 2 separate statements indicating that Biden's proposal was not, in fact, Israel's proposal. Former President Barack Obama let slip that the proposal was actually Biden's and not Israel's proposal.
Meaning it was Obama's proposal.
Exactly.
Biden.
Hamas, however, reacted favorably since the deal would allow the terror group to survive. Biden's intent appears to have been to box Israel into a deal that Hamas would have approved, making it harder for Israel to reject it. Rather than claiming credit for the proposal, he presented it as if it had come from Israel, which would serve to undermine trust between Netanyahu and the right-wing parties in his coalition, bringing down the Israeli government.
So this whole
There you go.
thing was designed to chip away at the Netanyahu
Absolutely.
coalition. They
That's
have a
right.
different governing system that we have here in the United States. They have a coalition form of government so that Netanyahu would be removed from power. So, boy, how does this bode for our nation, Brother Jim, in light of Genesis 12, verse 3?
Genesis 12, verse 3, wake up, America, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed.
You know, in addition to this being highly deceptive and manipulative towards God, the apple of God's eye, the nation of Israel, and in addition to the fact of the negative consequences this will no doubt bring against our country, where God says, I'll bless those who bless the Hebrews and I'll curse those who curse the Hebrews. In addition to all this, is this not stage setting for the Antichrist's peace treaty?
Absolutely.
You have a scenario here where Israel is being coerced into a treaty that they don't want. And I believe that's largely psychological stage setting for Daniel chapter 9, verse 27.
Excellent point. Yes.
Which tells us that the event that's going to start the tribulation period will be a peace treaty between the Antichrist and unbelieving Israel. I'm not saying Biden is the Antichrist. What I'm saying is he's put forth a psychology that the Antichrist will build upon.
He's a tool.
A tool, absolutely. Anything you want to say about that before we go on to our next major subject here?
Pray for America. Pray for America.
Please do. Let's go on to our next bullet point, which is the Gog-Magog alignment. And I'm telling you, Brother Jim, it is just difficult to keep up with these nations and how they're fitting into the exact pattern that Ezekiel 38 and 39 predicts.
Amen, brother.
Folks, if you haven't read those chapters, you need to read through them because they're in play right now, like no other chapters of the Bible, in terms of stage setting, where God predicts specific nations will, spearheaded by Russia, Iran, and Turkey, will come against the nation of Israel in the last days. If you're wanting some analysis on, why we think Rosh is Russia and why we think the Sudan, Iran, Turkey, Libya, and Saudi Arabia are involved, I do recommend my book, The Middle East Meltdown. We'll give you the documentation for that.
Great book.
It really relates to the fact that those names that you read in Ezekiel 38 and 39 show up in Genesis 10.
That's right.
And it's just a matter of figuring out where those ancient people groups, Noah's descendants, settled. And
That's
the modern nations containing those people groups are the principal players in this famous or infamous Gog and Magog invasion, which is yet future and coming. And the stage is being set incredibly fast, I believe, for this invasion. So with that being said, notice this map here between Rosh, or Russia, and Cush, or the Sudan. We believe that Rosh is Russia. Notice this quote from Gesenius in 1847, the father of modern-day lexicography. He indicates here that Rosh, in his study of Ezekiel 38 and 39, is a proper name, a proper noun, and he says it is undoubtedly the Russians.
Yes, he does.
And you can read his material and receive his explanation as to why he thinks this. And keep in mind, he is not a lightweight. He's the father of modern-day lexicography, which is the science and art of compiling Hebrew dictionaries. And he made that statement in 1847 when Russia was a Christian Orthodox country and wasn't going to invade anybody.
Amazing.
But the Communist Revolution happened in 1917. Russia took on a expansionistic mindset, and Israel was reborn in 1948. And now what Gesenius anticipated from Ezekiel's prophecy started to make a lot of sense. It didn't make any sense in his day, but it makes a lot of sense
Wow.
today. Now, the other player is the Sudan. And you'll notice this quote here from Josephus, because essentially what Ezekiel uses instead of the word Sudan is he uses the word Cush.
Mhm. Right.
And when you study Josephus, a first century historian, maybe wrote a little bit towards the beginning of the second century, he basically says Cush, where did Cush, that's mentioned in Genesis 10, where did they settle? He says that's Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And you see that there in his quote. Do you mind reading that quote for us from Josephus?
Sure thing. For of the 4 sons of Ham, time has not at all hurt the name of Cush, for the Ethiopians over whom he reigned are even at this day, both by themselves and by all men in Asia, called Cushites.
Now, Cush is a little tricky because Ethiopia, the name Ethiopia is a bit misleading because it did not refer to the modern state of Ethiopia.
Right.
So when you see Cush translated Ethiopia in Ezekiel 38, we believe it's largely talking about a part of the world called the Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a little help here from the Wycliffe Bible Encyclopedia. And what does this writer say?
All right. The designation Ethiopia is misleading, for it did not refer to the modern state of Ethiopia, Cush, bordered Egypt on the south, or modern Sudan.
So what Ezekiel predicted 2,600 years ago is Rosh, or Russia, aligned with the Sudan, which is in North Africa, would
Wow.
invade the
Just
nation
wow.
of Israel in the last days. Now, one of the criticisms of this perspective that we're giving is, oh, come on, there's no Russian activity in northern Africa or the Sudan. In fact, I've heard actually prophecy teachers say this, that we're a long way away from the Gog-Magog invasion because North Africa is not fitting into prophetic alignment.
That's
at
what
least
they
not
say.
yet. And that just isn't true. I mean, notice this article here from criticalthreats.org, May the 31st, 2024. It says Russian Red Sea Logistic Center in Sudan. So Russia is building a military presence in Sudan, meaning that she's forming an alliance with Sudan, making exactly what Ezekiel saw completely and totally credible, as the two will be in cahoots invading Israel in the last days. But help us with that article.
Can I just quickly
Absolutely.
say, anyone who can look at these articles and not realize that the book of God is a divine book is got to be crazy.
That's exactly right.
God's word is true. Here's the article. It says here, Russia is planning to build a logistical support center on Sudan's Red Sea coast, which it likely intends to use to advance its efforts to secure a Russian naval base in Sudan. Russia's backing of the SAF, and that stands for Sudanese Armed Forces, aligns Iranian and Russian policies and strategies in the region. This enables the Kremlin to coordinate aid with Iran, which is already sending drones to the SAF.
So this coordinates the efforts not just of the Sudanese Air Force and Russia, but Iran.
Yeah.
Who's another player in all of this? She's Persia.
You can't make this stuff up.
You can't.
The article continues, Russia will likely use the logistics center in Port Sudan to facilitate its own logistic activities in Africa. Port Sudan is farther from Russia's various military deployments in the West African Sahel than is its existing bridgehead in Libya, and it is only marginally closer to its other primary areas of operation in the Central African Republic. And the article continues.
By the way, as you're reading that sentence, you notice the word Libya.
I did notice
Now,
that.
we haven't even thrown Libya into the mix, but Libya is put.
Yes.
She's another one of the invaders.
That's right.
So this article, talking about the presence of Russia in North Africa, is tying together Libya with the whole thing and
Yeah.
tying together Persia with the whole thing.
Yep.
Well, those are the very players that Ezekiel mentioned.
It sure is.
Yes.
Continuing, Sudanese leaders have also framed cooperation with Iran and Russia as a necessity due to a lack of support from other partners, including the West, underlining the transactional nature of this relationship. Russia has had long-standing ties with SAF elements dating back to the reign of Bashir, but it was primarily supporting the RSF, which stands for Rapid Suppressed Forces, to protect Russian interests in Sudanese gold that it has used to help fund its war in Ukraine and mitigate the impact of Western sanctions.
Now, before you get too far, you'll notice what this says. Russia has had long-standing ties
Yes.
with the Sudanese Air Force. So this is not something new. They've
Yeah.
been developing a presence there in Sudan for a long time, but now it's reaching, full measure.
Continuing, Russia's backing of the SAF aligns Iranian and Russian policies and strategies in the region. Iran has strengthened its bilateral relations with the SAF since late 2023 and started sending drones to the SAF in late 2023 and early 2024. The Wall Street Journal reported in March of 2024 that Iran unsuccessfully attempted to use these ties and promises of a helicopter carrier ship to secure a permanent naval base in Port Sudan. Iran seeks a Red Sea naval base for reasons similar to Russia's, to project power farther westward. Iran would use a Red Sea base to support out-of-area naval operations and attacks on international shipping. This power projection includes threatening Red Sea shipping traffic and creating opportunities to launch attacks into Israel with systems fired from surface combatants. Russia aligning with Iran would also enable the Kremlin to coordinate with Iran, which is already sending drones to the SAF. And finally, the Kremlin has simultaneously strengthened positions across Africa throughout 2024. Russia has been reinforcing its position in Libya since March with approximately 1,800 African Corps troops and thousands of tons of supplies. The Africa Corps are also extended into Burkina Faso and Niger in January and March with small 100 troop deployments while expanding the main base supporting the roughly 2,000 soldiers operating across Mali. Africa Corps affiliated media said the group would grow the Burkina continent to at least 300 troops and presumably plans to expand its footprint in Niger as U.S. forces withdraw.
Now, here is a map put out by the same author of this particular article, and the title of this particular map is Russian Military Facilities in Africa.
Look at that.
And you'll notice that they have a presence in the Sudan. We just got finished talking about that. They have a presence in Libya. All of these things are prophetically significant. And they also have a presence in Niger. We've done prior shows on that. So this argument that, we're a long way away from the Gog-Magog invasion because nothing's going on in North Africa. Think again.
Somebody's asleep at the table.
So with all that being said, let's throw in another player here, Iran. Here is our map with Persia or Iran circled. She's also one of the invaders. So keep your eye on Iran. And Iran, as we've reported, is if she doesn't have nuclear weapons already, she's about ready to get them.
That's true.
So here's this article from Politico.com, May the 27th. It says Iran further increases its stockpile of uranium enriched to near weapons grade levels. What's going on here?
Iran has further increased its stockpile of uranium enriched to near weapons grade levels, according to a confidential report on Monday by the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the latest in Tehran's attempts to steadily exert pressure on the international community. This is all under the guidance of Iran's supreme leader and likely won't change after last week's helicopter crash that killed Iran's president and foreign minister.
So the fact that the number 2 and the number 3 guy in Iran just got killed in a helicopter crash is going to stop nothing.
No, stops nothing. The report seen by the Associated Press said Iran now has 142.1 kilograms, that's 313.2 pounds, of uranium enriched up to 60%. Uranium enriched at 60% purity is just a short technical step away from weapons-grade levels of 90%. According to the IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency's definition, around 42 kilograms or 92.5 pounds of uranium enriched to 60% is the amount at which creating one atomic weapon is theoretically possible. Iran has maintained its nuclear program is peaceful, but the IAEA chief, Rafael Mariano Grossi, has already warned that Tehran has enough uranium enriched to near weapons-grade levels to make several nuclear bombs if it chose to do so.
Wow.
The latest IAEA report also said that Tehran has not reconsidered its September 2023 decision to bar nuclear inspectors from monitoring its nuclear program. And it goes on to say that the report also said there was no progress so far in reinstalling more monitoring equipment, including cameras removed in June 2022. Since then, the only recorded data is that of IAEA cameras installed at a centrifuge workshop in the city of Isfahan in May 2023, although Iran has not provided the IAEA with access to this data.
So in terms of uranium-enriched material, they're almost to weapons-grade levels.
Mm-hmm.
They've kicked out the inspectors from the
Yeah.
IAEA.
Nothing's changed.
And the cameras that are supposedly monitoring what they're doing, those have been disabled.
Yeah.
So
No data for you.
yeah. So Iran's trajectory into becoming an atomic Ayatollah, weapons of mass destruction is almost guaranteed. I mean,
You're right.
I don't see anything that's stopping it. And once that happens, what are we going to do then? Because you're dealing with a
Be too late.
Shiite theocracy that believes the 12th Mahdi is going to return to the earth during a time of confusion and chaos, which they themselves are causing, and will have the ability to cause
Want to cause it.
once they have their hands on weapons of mass destruction. So we're literally living in a time period where Ezekiel's prophecies about an aggressive Iran and Israel are in full swing.
Amen, brother.
Would you add anything to that?
No, keep going.
Well, if that's
good.
not enough, did you know that the Ayatollah in Iran is writing letters to our students here in the United States?
Well, why not, right?
Here's this article from the Tehran Times. It says the Ayatollah Khamenei's letter to American students draws ire in the Zionist camp. Well, I hope it would.
And rightly so.
So apparently he's very, very happy about these student protests that have been taking place at our college campuses where they're blaming Israel for everything and trying to say Israel is some kind of genocidal power, and they're mindlessly chanting from the river to the sea, the land of Palestine will be free. The Ayatollah writes him a letter saying thumbs up. And by the way, I don't know if it's in this particular source, but I've heard other people talking about it. He's telling these students to read the Quran.
Yeah, well, why not, right?
So what's going on here?
Well, hey, all I can say here is the propaganda's working, isn't it?
Sure is.
Several Israeli and American figures have reacted angrily to a letter by the leader of the Islamic Revolution, which praised students in the U.S. universities for standing up for Palestinians subject to an ongoing genocide in the besieged Gaza Strip. Quote, "When you've won the Ayatollah, you've lost America," wrote U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson on X. Johnson was met with boos when he visited Columbia University's campus last month to speak with protesting students asking for divestment from Israeli institutions. In a later interview, the Republican called the students aspiring terrorists, saying he would make sure that college professors and pupils involved in the protests would be hauled in front of Congress. Another furious reaction came from Richie John Torres, a U.S. representative for New York's 15th Congressional District. Torres said that Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei's praising of American students means that they are useful idiots on the wrong side of history. Some Israeli officials were also fuming after the release of the letter. Quote, "Bravo, students, you are now the beloved children of Massa Amini's killer," said Israel's envoy to Belgium and Luxembourg on her social media account. Idit Rosenzweig Abu was referring to the passing of an Iranian woman who lost her life in September of 2022, days after collapsing in a police station. Western and Israeli media outlets claimed Amini had passed away due to a brain injury she sustained during a confrontation with police forces.
In other words, these are the people that you're siding with by doing these protests.
Exactly.
You're siding with one of the most bloodthirsty, brutal regimes on planet Earth.
And they hate women.
Well, there we go.
Mm-hmm. A lawyer
where are the feminists?
Hello. A lawyer working for the Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy wrote on X, quote, "When Ayatollah Khamenei is applauding you, you are on the wrong side of history." American students, however, seem to have received encouragement from Ayatollah Khamenei's letter. They hailed the message as a sign that their efforts have not gone unnoticed. For the past 2 months, students have been setting up encampments in universities across the United States, asking their institutions to cut ties with Israeli entities.
So these students are basically useful idiots.
Yes, they
for
are.
The Ayatollah.
Yes, they are.
He recognizes them as such by corresponding with them.
Yep.
So it's not just Persia that's going to play a role in this last days scenario. If we can put up this map here, Turkey is going to play an aggressive role against the nation of Israel in the last days, according to Ezekiel 38 and 39. And what has Erdogan, the leadership of Turkey, been saying lately? Notice this particular tweet, I guess we would call it, from X. He said something recently, didn't he?
Yes. Turkey's President Erdogan calls on the Islamic world to unite against Israel. Quoting, "What are you waiting for to take a joint decision on Israel? What more needs to happen for you to react? I swear Allah will hold us all accountable for this." Close quote.
Now, keep in mind, Turkey is the place where Israelis at one time took their vacations.
That's right.
Ezekiel said, like these other countries, Turkey will turn on Israel.
God's word.
And we see the outworking of it, constantly and perpetually. If we can put up the map again, here we've got Russia, who we've mentioned earlier, and Turkey cooperating with each other. And consequently, it's no surprise that the two would be in cahoots, much like Russia is in cahoots with Sudan,
That's right,
and Libya and Iran. So this is an article that came from news24.com, hot off the press, June 4th, 2024, and it's entitled "Russia Welcomes NATO Member Turkey." Keep that in mind, how fast Turkey has shifted.
Yeah.
A NATO member. Why would we not, in other words, paraphrasing a little bit here, reject the invitation to join BRICS.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Turkey, a NATO member, is apparently interested in joining BRICS, at least in a why not kind of way. Russia is happy to hear that. Russia welcomes Turkey's reported why not desire to become part of the BRICS group of nations. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Tuesday, saying the subject would be on the agenda of the organization's next summit. Peskov said there was heightened interest in BRICS, a group now comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Ethiopia, Iran, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates from various states. On Monday, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan began a visit to Beijing, the highest level visit by a Turkish official to BRICS member China since 2012. Fidan held talks with Chinese counterpart Wang Yi and other officials during the visit. Asked whether Turkey would want to join BRICS during a talk at the Center for China and Globalization on Monday, Fidan said, "We would like to, of course. Why would we not?" NATO member Turkey had come under fire by its Western allies in recent years over its ties with Russia, with some saying that its axis was shifting away from the Western military alliance.
Now, that last sentence can't be emphasized enough, because Turkey, once an ally of Israel, once an ally of the West, Ezekiel said, no, Turkey is going to be an invader. And you've watched Turkey shift in our lifetime.
Absolutely.
And this sentence here is exactly what Ezekiel predicted. NATO member Turkey had come under fire by its Western allies in recent years over its ties with Russia, with some saying that the axis was shifting away from the Western military alliance. Now, BRICS is something we've reported on before. As you indicated, it stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I think I made a mistake in one of our prior shows. I said the S is South America. No, it's not South America. It's South Africa, not the...
Just wait.
Just wait. Not the first mistake I've made, but certainly not the last mistake either. So we try to correct our errors when we become aware of them. But BRICS is a big deal for another reason. BRICS, they want to develop their own currency globally,
Right.
to dump the dollar.
Right.
So that becomes part of the explanation why the United States is experiencing the inflation that it's experiencing, why United States currency doesn't go as far as it used to go, and why the United States will probably need to decline in preparation for this new world order that's coming. So we've reported on BRICS from that standpoint, but now BRICS, with Russia's encouragement, says, hey, let's let Turkey involved. And Turkey is like, why not? We want to join too. So it's just more evidence of this alignment developing between Russia and Turkey as part of these invaders in the last days.
Ezekiel.
Yes, indeed. And one other thing before we leave this Gog-Magog alignment is Saudi Arabia is falling
One more.
exactly into prophetic orbit. Here's our map. You notice that Saudi Arabia, who we believe is Sheba and Dedan, these other nations have arrows coming from them to Israel, meaning that they will invade Israel, but not Saudi Arabia. Why didn't we put an arrow there for Saudi Arabia? Because we believe Saudi Arabia is mentioned.
We do.
In Ezekiel 38, verse 13. What is Saudi Arabia doing as this invasion is transpiring?
Ezekiel 38:13. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all its villages will say to you, have you come to capture spoil? Have you assembled your company to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to capture great spoil?
So Sheba and Dedan, Saudi Arabia will protest the invasion.
Right.
Now that's a strange prophecy. Why would a Muslim country protest the invasion instead of joining in it? Well, we've seen evidence of why constantly.
We do.
First of all, Saudi Arabia wants normalization with Israel through the Abraham Accords. Secondly, Saudi Arabia, when Iran fired I think 300 projectiles
Oh, yeah.
from
Missiles,
Iran
rockets.
into Israel. Guess who intercepted them? Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, that's right.
And Saudi Arabia is also now arresting people
Yeah.
who are on social media criticizing Israel.
It's unbelievable.
Have you ever heard
It's
of
unbelievable.
an Islamic country arresting people
Mm,
for publicly criticizing Israel?
mm.
That's how bad Saudi Arabia wants to normalize relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
And the Saudi normalization is almost a done deal with Israel, where
Yeah.
according to these Abraham Accords, a said Muslim nation simply acknowledges that Israel is on the map, and Israel opens up to
Yeah.
said Islamic country the 4 T's: trade, travel, tourism, technology. So Saudi Arabia is shifting exactly into the orbit God said she would be in on the eve of this
Yes.
invasion. And Saudi Arabia now is changing its school books.
This is unbelievable.
This is an article from Times of Israel, hot off the press, June 4th, 2024. Saudi Arabia, this is an Islamic country,
This is mind-boggling.
largely removes negative portrayal of Israel from its school curriculum. What's happening here?
Well, if I had not read this article, I would have not believed it. Here it is. A study of Saudi school textbooks has found increased progress on the kingdom's portrayal of Israel and Zionism, in continuation of a positive trend that has emerged in recent years. Textbooks for the 2023-24 school year no longer teach that Zionism is a racist European movement, and no longer deny the historical Jewish presence in the region, according to the study published last week by the nonprofit Impact SE, which monitors educational curricula in Middle Eastern and North African countries. Designations of Israel as an enemy state have been expunged.
Wow.
Wow. The name Palestine, which previously covered the entirety of Israeli territory, has now been removed, the report highlights. And then it has more to the article, aiming for war and peace with Saudis. It says, the study on Saudi textbooks found that anti-Semitism has been practically eradicated from the kingdom's curriculum. In past years, Saudi students had been exposed to egregious examples of hate and incitement in textbook, the report reported. Quoting, examples which have since been removed included the characterization of Jews as treacherous individuals and Quranic verses teaching that Jews turned into monkeys. Problematic content promoting violent jihad and martyrdom has also been removed in recent years, the report noted.
They're self-censoring the Quran.
This is crazy. The Quran.
Yeah.
Wow.
In an Islamic country.
Wow.
Now, granted, this is a Sunni form of Islam, but the hatred for
Still.
Israel is equal amongst the Shiites and the Sunnis. Iran Shiite, Saudi Arabia Sunni. But you're literally seeing, Saudi Arabia becoming pro-Israel, which seems to be what Ezekiel 38 verse 13 anticipates.
It sure
what
does.
else is going on?
The final heading says, Israel committing continuous genocidal massacres. Some of the most dramatic changes in Saudi attitudes towards Israel have occurred in the religious sphere and in relations with the Jewish world, with a delegation of U.S. Jews visiting the kingdom in 2022 and Israeli Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi holding a prayer service in Riyadh days before October 7. Furthermore, in 2022, Mohammed bin Abdul Karim Al Issa, the Saudi Secretary General of the Muslim World League and a former Minister of Justice in the monarchy, led a Muslim delegation to the Auschwitz concentration camp.
So they're acknowledging that what Hitler did
They are.
was wrong. This is a Muslim
This is
country
huge.
turning in this direction.
Huge.
Now, here is a map. Let's put this up. This is a typical Islamic map. This was actually a picture taken from some folks on one of our recent trips, I believe traveling from the United Arab Emirates to meet us in Rome. And this shows up on their, flight,
Yeah, the
television
screens they have. Yeah.
screen. And you'll notice that Israel is even mentioned on this map. They just write over it Palestinian territories. I mean, this is common in Islam.
A par for the course.
Well, what has happened is that the Saudis have changed their textbooks. Let's put up the next couple of maps if we could.
Wow.
This is as late as 2023.
This is amazing.
The Saudis, in their social studies books, compulsory education, grade 9, put Palestine over where Israel used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then you notice in the 2024 edition, they took Palestine out, moving
Wow.
that they're moving in the direction of acknowledging Israel's existence on the map.
Just amazing.
And again, folks, the reason we're bringing these things up is because Ezekiel 38 verse 13 predicts that Sheba and Dedan, Saudi Arabia, are going to protest this invasion.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really understood why until now, but we're
Right.
living in the time in history where we now have a cogent explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Would
Wow.
you add anything to that?
I'm just astounded. Wow. Pray for that. Pray for that
Yes,
process.
It's amazing. Let's see if we can fit one more in here, Brother Jim. This relates to globalism. What does Daniel chapter 7 verse 23 anticipate for the end of the age?
Daniel 7:23. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it.
Now, one world government is coming, and one world government will dominate the earth before Jesus comes back. And I'm telling you, folks, we are on the precipice of one world government through this WHO, the World Health Organization. They are using the issue of protecting us from the next pandemic as an excuse to bring in global governance. And they almost pulled it off recently
Boy,
in
didn't they.
Geneva. They didn't quite get it done, but they, at the last minute, pushed through a ton of amendments so that when they get it done, which I think is inevitable, these are the amendments, the international health resolutions that we will be forced to live under. So what's going on in this article?
The World Health Assembly proceeded into overtime on Saturday as delegates sought last-minute agreement on the International Health Regulation Amendments and Pandemic Agreement, items that had preoccupied the meeting for the past several days. Late in the evening of June 1st, the Assembly did pass amendments to the IHRS's by consensus, meaning no nation objected to their passage, but failed to agree on text for a pandemic accord, something that occupied much of the focus of the WHO for the past several years. However, the Assembly did authorize the intergovernmental negotiating body tasked with developing a pandemic agreement draft to continue working toward one before the 2025 World Health Assembly, with the possibility that one might be agreed to by the end of 2024. The IHRs themselves have been in existence since 1969 and were last modified in 2005, but have drawn more attention in the years since the COVID-19 crisis, as government handling of the pandemic has become more closely scrutinized. So what was added to the final version of the IHR pass on June 1st? Here are some of the key changes.
And before you get to that, keep in mind that according to this article, they've been trying to do this since 1969.
Right.
It's just COVID has given them an excuse to do it.
Yeah.
To put the world under a one world sort of treaty, some kind of trans-governmental force that we acquiesce our sovereignty to, that makes decisions for us on our behalf to protect us from the next pandemic.
Yeah.
When they get this treaty rammed through, and I say when, not if, here are some of the amendments that the nations of
Yeah.
the earth will be living under. These they jammed through
Yep.
at the last minute before they concluded their recent meeting in Geneva. What's going on with these amendments?
All right, folks, listen carefully to the wording. Article 2 increases the scope of the IHR to prepare for diseases, something that had not been in the scope previously. Article 3. The guiding principles were amended to include equity and solidarity. The implementation of these regulations shall be with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons, and shall promote equity and solidarity.
Now, equity is just another word for Marxism.
Exactly.
So they jammed equity into these amendments.
Yes. Article 4 requires a national IHR authority to be established or designated with a directive to change a member state's laws to accomplish this if needed. This authority will handle implementation of the IHR within the member state.
So this international body can change the laws of a country.
There it is. Articles 8 and 10. Consulting with WHO changed from may to should, more of a requirement.
So in other words, this is not voluntary. This is not something you may do. This is something that you should do.
Exactly. Articles 11 and 12 adds pandemic emergency, defined as discussed above, to the areas of public health concern that the WHO can respond to. These provisions grant more authority to the Director General to make certain decisions and, in general, bind member states to a greater level of scrutiny and control. Article 13, WHO shall work to facilitate and provide equitable access to health products, defined as referenced above. Article 44 requires that member states maintain or increase domestic funding to support implementing the IHR. Requires that states report on these outcomes at the next WHA.
Required.
Listen to the wording. Article 44 again establishes a coordinating funding mechanism that will conduct analysis of where funding is needed and report to the WHA. Article 54, the committee is established to facilitate the effective implementation of the IHR. And Annex 1, one of the core capacity requirements under the new IHR is that countries build the capacity to address misinformation and disinformation, something that was not in the previous IHR.
Now, misinformation and disinformation, giving some international body the ability to regulate internet and social media because of misinformation and disinformation. All you need to do, folks, is to cross out the words misinformation and disinformation and write in the word censorship.
Absolutely.
Any type of expert opinion that contradicts the narrative that they're trying to push will be eliminated from the internet and from social media. And this starts to explain why we have been put under so much pressure through different politically correct woke organizations in the social media world not to post certain things on the internet. And if you do, you get strikes against your channel. And, they shadow ban you where you put up a tweet and the other people out there can't see, but they didn't tell you it was being shadow banned. Why is all of this happening? Because the United States of America under the Biden regime is largely marching lockstep with this WHO treaty, even though it hasn't even been implemented yet.
Yeah. Well, I just have to say something right here. I'm
Absolutely.
sorry, quickly. We've sort of tongue-in-cheek referred to the pandemic as the plandemic. Well, I would like to suggest that it is a plandemic because it was a test bed so that they could put this Annex number 1 in here.
There you go.
Because, they got pushback. about this misinformation, disinformation. So now they're including this as something that they're going to regulate. And then with that said, we'll finish this article up. With their inclusion, we see the WHO's desire to integrate the IHRs with any pandemic agreement that is developed, something that was discussed at the World Health Assembly. The WHO is definitely thinking of these two agreements as part of one package. In addition, the IHRs contain a number of references to experts sitting on and advising panels and committees.
So these health experts
So-called.
sit in judgment on you.
Exactly.
Even though we never voted for these experts.
Exactly.
Why is this an issue? It's an issue because Daniel said world government would dominate the world in the last days. And it's an issue because what is being proposed here is fundamentally anti-American.
Absolutely.
What does Article 2, Section 2, Paragraph 2 of the United States Constitution say, Brother Jim?
He that is the president shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur.
You have to understand this, folks. The Biden regime is not allowed to enter into this treaty
Right.
without a 2/3 supermajority approval in the Senate. So what they do is they just don't call this a treaty.
Right.
They call it an accord or an agreement. It goes directly against what George Washington warned against in his farewell address. What did he say there?
It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world.
Well, we're not steering clear of alliances here.
No, we're
running
not.
headlong into those alliances. And ultimately, this is an attack on we the people.
Yes.
Could you remind us what our Declaration of Independence says?
Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government.
Governing with the consent of the governed is what the Declaration of Independence
Absolutely
says. It's part
right.
of our inalienable rights. It's what Abraham Lincoln reiterated in his Gettysburg Address. What did one of our great presidents say?
Quoting, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Once you have people that you don't vote for telling you what you have to put into your body or what you have to wear in terms of a mask or, things like that, you're no longer a free republic.
That's right.
And we're hurling headlong into the end times. And don't mistake this little roadblock that they experienced in Geneva as a U-turn. There's no U-turn here.
No.
A speed bump, yes, but not a U-turn.
No going back.
What did the head of the World Health Organization say?
All right, General Director Tedros, quoting, today the nations of the world made history at the World Health Assembly. After 2 years of negotiations, they adopted a strong package of amendments to the international health regulations based on the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. The IHR was last updated 19 years ago. The amendments adapted today strengthened global preparedness, surveillance, and response to public health emergencies, including pandemics. And although the pandemic agreement has not yet been finalized, the Health Assembly has charted the way forward. It has agreed to extend the mandate of the intergovernmental negotiating body to finalize negotiations on the pandemic agreement as soon as possible, and by next year's World Health Assembly at the latest. The success of the IHR amendments demonstrates that in our divided and divisive world, countries can still come together to find common cause and common ground.
So that's our prophecy update for today. World versus Israel, Gog-Magog alignment, and our trend into globalism. And don't you guys dare miss next week because we've got some incredibly hard-hitting things to talk about.
We do.
In terms of Orwellianism, the United States, persecution, and apostasy. Before we sign off for today, I want to just bring this to people's attention because it's time sensitive. It has to do with June 24th through 28th, 9 to 5. We're holding a youth summit here at Sugarland Bible Church, put on by an outstanding organization called Disciple Makers Multiplied. And what this is it's an intense study all week long through one of the most misunderstood books of the Bible, the book of James.
Amen.
So there's
Yeah.
a QR code where you can find out more about that. The event will be live streamed. We need folks to register. We're offering lunch. And so we want to make that people aware of that, and I'll say more about it in our next session. So at this point, we hope you enjoyed Pastor's Point of View for today, and we'll see you next time on Pastor's Point of View. God bless you. Thank you for watching.
God bless.